Peace, family. This is Tariq. Welcome back again for another day, another episode of Knowledge Corner. All right, today's insight: free will. Free will. I got this from the song LNF by Phabo. Not Phabo from D for L, but this is a singer named Phabo. This was released as a single November 19th of 2020, but it was actually also included on his debut album, which is called So Curious, which was released 7/16 of 2021. If you've heard the song, you wouldn't necessarily think the song is about free will. But there was a part of the song that resonated with me, and it got me thinking about free will. It's the first sentence in the second verse. I'm not in control of your actions. I'm not in control of your actions. And when I think of that, I think of my children. And if you have kids, you understand what I mean by this. You could tell your kids, do this, do that. You could say that until you're blue in the face. But at the end of the day, they're still going to do what they want to do. That's their free will. I'll give an example of that. My son went to college. He went for a while, and then he dropped out. And when he dropped out, I was asking him, okay, so what are you going to do? How much more time do you have left in school? And he told me how much more time he had left, which was maybe like a year and a half or something like that. And he was just like, Dad, I can't do it anymore. So that infuriated me. When I tell you I was highly upset, I was highly upset. He was using his free will. But the key to that free will is when someone uses their free will, you want to know that whatever principles and morals that you have instilled in them, they're still going to be able to use. So in this particular case, my son used, all of the morals and scruples and everything that myself and his mother gave him, and he figured it out. And he actually ended up, going into law enforcement. I was extremely, proud of that. But it took him time to realize what he wanted to do. He uses free will. I look at the story of Moses in the Bible. And if you've ever read the Bible, the story of Moses is very, very broad. It actually covers multiple chapters, multiple books within the actual Bible. But the part that I want to focus on are the children of Israel. When you look at the children of Israel, they were in captivity in Egypt for over 400 years. And then Moses came along and told Pharaoh, let my people go. So eventually, after a lot of hardship and turmoil, Pharaoh allowed them to leave. Now, once they left and they were on their way to the promised land, that's when all this stuff started to happen. That's when they started complaining about, why are they in the wilderness? Why they're doing this, why they're doing that. And it got to a point to where Moses was up on, let me rewind. Through all of this, Moses has given them the laws that God has instilled in him, saying, these are the 10 commandments. These are the laws that I give to my children to follow. If you know what the 10 commandments are, you understand what I mean by this. One of the main laws one of the 10 commandments is You should not have, gods ahead of our God. So Moses went up on the mountain to pray with God, and he left his brother Aaron in charge. And I look at their symbolism as Moses being the teacher, Aaron being the substitute teacher. And if you've ever had a substitute teacher before, you know that anything goes in a class with a substitute teacher. And that's pretty much what the children of Israel did. They convinced Aaron to make a baby calf out of gold. They wanted to worship that because they reverted back to what the Egyptians were doing, because the Egyptians had many gods. This is after, keep in mind, this is after God gave them the 10 Commandments and told them to not have false gods. Do not worship idols. And they ended up doing it anyway. So Moses comes down and he sees this and he's pissed. And he tells them, God is infuriated. And he was infuriated. So what ends up happening? They get punished. And because they use their free will for not the betterment of themselves, but really breaking a law that God put in place, they had to pay for it. What happened to them was they had to roam around in the wilderness for 40 years. Now, some people may say that's really not a lot of time, but it is. God did that on purpose because he wanted everyone who went against his law to die. So those people were not allowed to go into the promised land. So the people who actually went into the promised land were the children of the people who actually broke God's law. Again, they used their free will, but they used their free will not the way God wanted them to do at all. And they paid the price. Joshua chapter 24, verse 15. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, that you were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That is one thing that for me, we all have our own free will. And I understand that sometimes we may stray from what God wants us to do. But if you are really in your faith, and if you really believe that God has your back, regardless if you stray away, you'll always get back on course. And I believe now, after years and years of trying to do things on my own, I firmly believe with all my heart that God has put me back on the path that I needed to be on, even though I use my free will not to the best of my ability. But I used it, as we all do, and I had to suffer for a long time. And I don't want anyone to have to go through that. But again, we have our free will, and sometimes we have to get our hands spanked, just like a little kid, when we do something wrong. And God has God doesn't care. He's going to do that. If he loves you, and he does love us because we're his children, he's going to make sure that he reprimands us. He does it all the time. Sometimes we just don't believe it, but he does. Surah, Al-Insan, which is the 76th surah or chapter in the Quran. This is ayat or verse 3. We showed him the way. Whether he be grateful or ungrateful, rests on his will. Again, when you're looking back on the children of Israel, when they made that calf, prior to that, Moses showed them the way by what God told him to give to the children of Israel. He gave them the 10 Commandments. and they were ungrateful of that, and they ended up doing something that ended up actually hurting them in the long run. Again, they used their free will, but they didn't use their free will the way they should have. So what is something that you have done that you know in hindsight you were using your free will the wrong way? Put that in the comments. I would love to hear that. Again, free will, we all have it. Some of us are more in tune with what God wants us to do than others. One thing that I've learned is that we all have our own talents. And if you don't use your talents, God is going to take them away from you. I give you an example. You know, I had a friend from high school, you know, extremely good basketball player. But he did not like to be coached. And he had every opportunity to go to a lot of different colleges to play basketball and eventually end up going to the pros. But he didn't like to be coached. He didn't like people telling him what to do, which is really counterproductive to being a basketball player, because you have to take coaching. And eventually now, 30 years later, he's at home working in a factory. He used his free will, but he didn't use it the way he should have used it. He should have learned that regardless of whatever you do in life, there's always going to be a level of coaching that you're going to have to do. You know, you looking at this video is a level of coaching that I'm giving you. You know, look at me as a spiritual, you know, advisor, a spiritual coach, you know, someone who's gone through certain things in his life. And I'm wanting you, the viewer, to learn from my mistakes. That way you don't have to make the same mistakes that I did, and you don't use your free will in vain. So, free will. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe, and positive energy activates constant elevation. Peace.